God bless you on this Saturday morning. Pray that all is well as we continue this Thanksgiving devotional. Pray that you've been blessed by the Thanksgiving devotional, and pray that you are being blessed by what the Lord is speaking to us. I want to look at Mark 5, verse 19. It says, "And he did not permit him, but said to him, 'Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you.'" And I love this story of this man who was possessed with demons. This man that we see was demon possessed, and then Jesus speaks and says, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." The man is telling Jesus his name is Legion. Then the man is saying, "We are many." All these demons, right? And then out of nowhere, these spirits come into the pigs. And as the unclean spirits come into the pigs, we know that they went down to sea and drowned in the sea, right? But there is a demon possessed man. He is possessed by a demon until the unclean spirit comes out of him because of an encounter with Jesus, which we ought to know that an encounter with Jesus changes everything. An encounter with Jesus makes things better. An encounter with Jesus makes things whole. An encounter with Jesus makes us all clean. And we all have been saved. We all have been changed. You can look at it right here in the text that this man who was once demon possessed is now clothed in his right mind. Can I get a witness here? He's clothed in his right mind. 1 minute he's possessed by a demon. 1 minute he's tormented by this unclean spirit. But an encounter with Jesus now has made him clothed in his right mind. And some people couldn't believe it. Some people couldn't even witness it. Can I get a witness here? And then the text shows that the reason Jesus tells him to go home, you see that the man who had these unclean spirits, he himself wants to go with Jesus, but Jesus says, "No, I need you to go home and tell your friends and tell how much God has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. Go home because I need you to be a witness to what I have done, and I need you to be a testimony of what the power of the Lord will do." Is there anybody that's thankful that the Lord has changed some situations around for you, that the Lord has done some great things for you? The Lord has made you well. The Lord has made you whole. The Lord has made you complete. The Lord has turned things around for you to where you can be able to say the exact same thing, that I'm going home, but I have to tell the story about how the Lord has made a way for me. I have to tell the story about how the Lord has kept me. I have to tell the story about how the Lord has built me up. I have to tell the story about how the Lord has changed things around, because all of us have a testimony that we can say, "I know what the Lord has done for me, and I know the things that I've been through. I know the things that I've encountered. I know the things that have hurt me. I know the challenges that I've had. I know the valleys I've had. I know the disappointments I've had. But now I have to also be able to say that I'm going home. I'm going to tell it. Look what it says. I'm going home to my friends. I'm going to my family, but I'm going a changed person." Is there anybody that can say that the Lord has changed you? Is there anybody that knows that the Lord has changed you? Is there anybody that knows that the Lord has made you better? The Lord has made you whole. The Lord has made you complete. The Lord has made you strong. The Lord has made you capable. The Lord has made you able. The Lord has allowed you to overcome things that you ought to be able to say, testify, and be a witness to, that I am what I am now because of how the Lord has changed me. I am what I am now because how the Lord has delivered me. I am what I am now because of the ways God has made for me. But I'm going home and I have a story to tell. I have to tell what the Lord has meant to me. I have to tell how good God has been to me. I have to tell how much God has changed my life. You ought to be able to say the Lord has changed my life. You ought to be able to say the Lord has changed me. You ought to be able to say the Lord has made me better. You ought to be able to say the Lord has made me complete. You ought to be able to say the Lord has made me whole. You ought to be able to say the Lord has guided me through some things and got me through some things and allowed me to live through some things to where now I've got to go home and I've got to be a witness. I can't help but be a witness. I can't help but to express all the things that God has done for me. Because if you just knew my story, if you just knew the challenges, but now that I have been changed, now that I have been delivered, now that I've been set free, now that I see how God has made ways for me, no, I've got to praise him and I've got to let everybody know that when you trust in God and when you let the Lord work on your behalf, God will indeed make things better. God, it will indeed turn things around. God will indeed allow you to arise. God will indeed allow you to get through a tough time, get through a valley, get through a challenge. Anybody on this Thanksgiving season in this month of November can be a witness and say, God has allowed me to get through some various challenges. I've gotten through some things only because of my encounter with Jesus. That's why you ought to be able to say, I can tell anybody, I can tell everybody, I can tell the story about how good God is. I can be a witness and I can express everything that God does because I do know how much God has done for me. I know how much God continues to do for me. I know how much I can trust in him. I know how much I can confide in him, but I know for a personal experience what he's done for me personally. See, when you know what God has done for you personally, you don't mind expressing it. When you know what God has done for you personally, you don't mind telling it. When you know what God has done for you personally, you don't mind lifting up a hand. You don't mind worshiping. You don't mind being a witness for the Lord to where I can say, I'm going home because I have something to say. I was in this condition, but God got me out. I was in this situation, but God got me out. I was going through this problem, but God has delivered me. Somebody ought to be able to say, I've gone through various situations. I've gone through various ups and downs. I've gone through various challenges. I've gone through various scenarios. I've gone through various periods. I've gone through various weaknesses. I've gone through various dark times, dark moments, dark days, dark seasons, dark years. I've gone through so much, but God has still guided me. God has still loved me. God has still uplifted me. God has still brought me through. God has still allowed me to stand. God has still allowed me to live. God has still allowed me to be able to make it through because it's been some challenges. It's been some tough seasons. It's been some tough scenarios, but God has allowed us to still be here. God has allowed us to still live. You have to go home and tell the truth because we all have something to say. We all have something to express. We all have something to talk about. We all have something to be able to say, I am a witness about what the Lord has done for me. Do you know what God has done for you? Come on, you ought to be able to put that. You ought to be able to put that in the comments and say, I know what the Lord has done for me. You ought to be able to say, I know what I know because I've seen the Lord do something for me personally. He says in the text, and he did not permit him, but said to him, go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. Woo! What a powerful thing. That word mercy in the Greek means to also have compassion, but it's another word. It's this word. It's another meaning. It's another meaning that means this: to help one that has been afflicted. Because it doesn't matter how much It doesn't matter how much you love God, you will be afflicted. Afflictions come to all of us some type of way. We can be afflicted with a sickness. You can be afflicted with bad news. You can be afflicted with a bad time. You can be afflicted just sometimes. You can be afflicted on your job. You can be afflicted in the church. You can be afflicted just going down the street. You can just be afflicted in various ways and various formations. But one thing about it is, when I know who I can go to, I know that my affliction won't last forever. When you know you can go to God, you ought to be able to say, my affliction will not last forever. Does not mean I won't have my trials. Does not mean I won't have my tough times. Does not mean I won't have my tough moments. But I do know it won't last always. Is there somebody that can say, I've been through some tough times just this year, but I'm holding on and I'm still alive. I'm still going because it does not last always. I've had my trials. I've had my tribulations. I've had my storms. I've had my setbacks, but it does not last always. Even though I've had to go through a storm that has been a long duration, it has not kept me from living. It has not stopped me from living. It has not stopped me from being excited. It has not stopped me from still lifting up my hands. It has not stopped me from still saying I trust in God. It has not stopped me at any point. Yes, it's been trying. Yes, it's been tough. Yes, it's been challenging. Yes, it's been hard. Yes, it's been rough, but I'm still alive. And I think that in a nutshell ought to be something that we ought to be able to say, that I'm still alive. I'm still alive. Anybody grateful that you're still alive? Anybody can say that I'm still alive and I'm thankful that I'm still alive. I know you've had some tough seasons, but you ought to say, I'm still alive. Right? Can you say I'm still alive? Can you make that personal? Can you make that clear that I'm still alive? And because I'm still alive, I have a testimony. I can talk about the fact that God has still kept me alive, even though my days of living for God have not always been easy. It's not always easy serving God, living for God, trusting in God when you're the one that is afflicted. You ask a parent, it's not easy for some parents living for God, trusting in God, when their child has been afflicted, when they have a child who may have cancer, when they have a child who may have Down syndrome, when they have a child who has autism, when they have a child who has Asperger's, when they have a child who's in a sense who's struggling with this and that. It's sometimes hard because I trust God, but I hate to see my child suffering. There's somebody who can say, I trust God, I believe in God, but it's tough. It's tough being the only one bringing money into the household. It's tough being a single parent with 3 or 4 children, but God is still yet sustaining. God is still yet keeping. God is still yet blessing. And because God is sustaining, because God is blessing, because God is keeping, even though that is a challenge, even though that can be an affliction, you are still alive to be able to say that even though I have this affliction, the Lord is still keeping me alive. The Lord is still keeping me strong. The Lord is still keeping me holding on. The Lord is still keeping me going. Even though I have this affliction, I'm still alive. Is there anybody that can say, I've had my various afflictions in my life, but I'm still here? I've had some afflictions just this year, but I'm still here. Just because I smile doesn't mean I don't have tough times. Just because I clap doesn't mean I don't have tough times. I can shout and still got a tough time. You can preach. I can preach and still have a tough time, because even though I trust in God, my afflictions are a reality, but what's also reality is God's power, because God's power is more powerful than my affliction. God's power is more stronger than my affliction. Yes, I have my affliction, but that does not mean I'm without hope. That does not mean I'm without strength. That does not mean that God has forgotten about me. That does not mean that God does not care about me. That does not mean that that God is not with me. Even in my afflictions, I still know that there's still one more way to get out of it. There's still one more turn. And you ought to be thankful for that next option. Some options have not worked, but you ought to be thankful Jesus is an option that always works. So he says, Jesus is saying, go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. But you got to go home and tell your friends. Go home and tell everybody what God has done. Go home and tell everybody what the Lord has done. Because the Lord does things all of us know nobody else can do. The Lord does things that all of us know it's been nobody but God that has done this. The Lord has done things that you ought to be able to say, I know that the Lord did this. The reason I am where I am right now is because the Lord did this. The reason I'm alive is because the Lord did this. The reason I'm hanging on is because the Lord did this. The reason I still have joy is because the Lord did this. The reason I still got hope is because the Lord did this. The reason I can still make it is because the Lord did this. The reason I can still lift up my head is because the Lord did this. The reason I can still keep on going and keep on moving, keep on walking, even though it's rough, even though it gets hard, even though it gets tough, even though it gets disappointing, even though it gets frustrating, even though it gets agitating, is because the Lord did this. Is there somebody that say, I have that type of belief, I have that type of testimony, and I know that for it to be true, that the Lord did this. Nobody else did it, but the Lord did this. Nobody else could do what the Lord did. He did it. He's done it. But I like this because the Lord should always be in the home. Our homes will be better when we have the Lord at the center. Our lives will be better when we have the Lord at the center. Churches will be better when the Lord is the center. Our world will be better when the Lord is the center. But you got to go home. You got to tell everybody about what God. And see, this is the thing. When you get delivered, don't forget who delivered you. When you get delivered, don't forget who to give the credit to. When you get delivered, don't forget to tell what really happened and tell the whole truth. Tell how you were down. Tell how you were uneasy. Tell how you didn't know if you were going to make it. Tell how you were in some dark places. Tell how your emotions were depressed. Tell how you were depressed. Tell how you were stressed. Tell how you were anxious. Tell it all, but also tell if it was not for God, if it hadn't have been for God, if it wasn't for God's goodness, God's mercy, God's grace, God's love, God's peace, God's power, God's kindness, I would not be here. I got to tell it because we tell a lot of stuff, right? We always tell something. If a restaurant got good food, we'll tell it. If somebody asks you where you found a certain pair of shoes or found a certain outfit or found a certain jersey, you would tell it. If you're going out of town and you know somebody that has been to a place where you are going and you may ask them what are some nice attractions to go see, they'll tell it. Of course, when people find out something juicy about somebody, they'll definitely tell that. We use our mouths to tell so much, right? We tell about whether it's going to be wet, whether it's going to be cold, whether it's going to be sunny. A weatherman tells us about the weather. A news anchor will tell us what's going on in the world as it relates to news. A news anchor will tell us that. A basketball coach will tell their team about the different plays they're going to run, about the different zones they want to play, about whether they're going to do a 1-4 offense, a motion offense, a pick and roll offense. Are they going to be just hanging around the perimeter, or are they going to take it down low? A football coach will tell their their team, especially when it is a big game. They're going to tell their team, give your best effort today. We don't want to lose to our rivals. We don't want to lose to the same, especially if they have a losing streak against their rival. They don't want to lose to that team again. So a football coach is going to speak and tell some words that will be impactful for the team. We use our mouths to tell so much. So we ought to be able to say, when the Lord is blessing, when the Lord is keeping, we ought to be able to tell that. We ought to be able to use our testimony as an evangelistic tool. We ought to be able to use our testimony as a tool to tell more people about our Christ, to tell more people about our Savior. Because hasn't the Lord done enough for you? Hasn't the Lord done so much for you? Hasn't the Lord gotten you through so much? Hasn't the Lord did stuff that you know? I cannot ill afford not to tell it, because I know it was God. God has blessed you. God has kept you. God has done some mighty things for you. God did it. Can I get a witness here? And we ought to tell it. I can't be quiet when I know how the Lord has helped me. I can't be quiet when I know how the Lord has saved me. I can't be quiet when I know how the Lord has made me still be able to be whole, to be healed. Because God will heal you. God will speak to you. And I love that God will speak words that'll heal you. God will speak words that'll make you keep standing. God will speak words that'll give you courage. God will speak words that will give you boldness. God will speak some words that'll give you love. God knows how to speak. God's words are why we're still here. In the midst of everything we see, in the midst of everything we face, you ought to thank God that God got words that'll keep you alive. God got words that'll keep you encouraged. God got words that'll keep you going. God got words that will make you say, I may be in a tough time. I may be in a tough battle. But one thing I know the Lord will make a way. I know the Lord will see me through. I know the Lord will guide me. I know the Lord will keep me. I know the Lord will make it better. I know the Lord will turn that darkness into brightness. I know that the Lord is able. I'm thankful that God always speaks powerful words. God always speaks meaningful words. God always speaks helping words. God always speaks majestic words. God always speaks words that lets me know it's going to be all right. That lets me know it's going to be good. That lets me know I will survive. I will live. I will make it. I'm not going to be in this situation always, but you ought to thank God that God speaks, and you ought to thank God that God has let you still live to where you can say, hey, listen, when you trust in God, it may not always go the way you want it to go, but trust me, when you let God work, God knows how to turn it around. God will turn that switch around. God will turn everything around. He speaks. He's with us day by day. You're never without God. Am I right? You're never without the Lord. The Lord is always with us. But we gotta tell people. We gotta tell the story. Don't be afraid to tell the story. Don't be afraid to tell your testimony. He's the one that's kept us. He's the one that's blessed us. He's the one that has done so much for us. So we need to make sure we go tell the story. We need to make sure we go tell everybody how much God has meant to us. Where will we be without God? None of us right now would be anywhere without God. None of us right now would be alive without God. None of us right now would be able to do what we do without God. A pastor can't preach without God. A mother can't raise her children without God. You can't sing without God. You can't drive your car without God. Everything we do, we can say, I can do it with God, but without God, I can do nothing. Without God, I'm powerless. Without God, I'm motionless. Without God, I'm useless. Without God, I have nothing to stand on. I don't even have a foundation. My foundation is Christ. And because Christ is my foundation, because of what Christ has did, and because I've had a bad day, but Christ is turning into a good day, I cannot be quiet about what God has done for me. And I'm not ashamed. Don't be ashamed of your testimony. Don't be ashamed to tell people what God has done for you. Don't be ashamed of your worship. Don't be ashamed of your hallelujah. Don't be ashamed of your thank yous. Don't be ashamed of God. You know where you've been and where you are now. You know the bad days, the bad times, the crisis that you have been in, but you know that God has brought you out. You know that God has brought you through, and you know that the reason you're alive right now is because of the Lord, and because of the Lord, you got so much in you to express. Don't be afraid to express everything that the Lord has done. So don't be afraid to tell your story. You got a story to tell. And thank God that God will use you to go home and tell the truth. Because all of us got a story. Don't miss telling your story. But thank God for his grace and mercy. Amen. God bless you and God keep you is my prayer. I pray that you have an awesome rest of the day. But don't forget to go home and tell the story. God bless you.